My name is Matodzi Amisi, and I am a senior M&E technical asset at Clear AA, which is one of the centers, one of the 6 centers globally that's focused on evaluation and supporting evaluation capacity building. How those with privilege, and it's not just about race, but anyone who has privilege also has the means to defend their privilege. And in a way, in the space around research, I think those who have had the privilege and access to opportunities, because it's also access to jobs, right? Access to work in government, have been a bit apprehensive about the changes that government has been wanting to implement. And so, yeah, but we will see how that, whether that actually changes the trends, and you have more different evaluators coming into the sector and being a voice to be reckoned with. Of my colleagues in the violence prevention space, the way that they evaluate programs, research programs, that's exactly what they do. You know, I've got a colleague of mine, Tamara Bram, whose whole approach to evaluating is really feminist, and it's really empowering of people. It's really not taking their voice and owning it, but it really is seeing things from people's perspective, is really involving them, is really also even in terms of financial resources, that the financial resources are not only being owned by the big evaluators from big universities or whatever, but that it's actually being shared with those that are in communities, which is quite an important issue, because that is what defines also power dynamics, right? So I mean, I know that there are people who are doing it, and there are people who are doing it quite successfully, and that is not impossible to evaluate programs and to study things in ways that is not disempowering to communities, and actually offers passage to people who might be in communities where they don't see opportunities. And by bringing an evaluation and doing it in a way that is inclusive, and that in a way that is participatory and empowering, it offers them passage out. It offers them, you know, opportunities to explore a different future. Giving you, I mean, depending on what you define as capacity building, evaluation capacity building. I mean, of course, then the answer could be different. But I think that the way that I was just explaining now, I mean, absolutely includes capacity building, because you are enabling people to participate in something. You're giving them the tools to participate in something, and allowing them to participate in something, allowing them to learn, you know, new skills, and potentially acquire new skills. They might not be the report writer later on, but like, you know, you're giving them certain skills that they can build on and grow on. I think even just when I look at how we were doing evaluation in DPME, just the involvement of program managers and involvement of people who are on the ground implementing program is quite an important thing, because otherwise, you know, this knowledge, otherwise 2 things happen. One is that evaluators sometimes don't fully understand the nitty-gritties, you know, in communities or in a program implementation space. And by involving people who are either actors in that program, it enriches the evaluation itself. But also, they get a different perspective, you know, by participating and hearing the kind of questions that evaluators ask. And so I think that it definitely encourages probably use it at a certain level, right? To use it like a really operational level. That does not mean that it guarantees that it will be used at a strategic level or, you know, higher up in management. But just, I think people getting different, like new forms of knowledge is always an important thing. I have seen how the tools that we develop in evaluation and the process of systematically assessing or evaluating a program, how that can be very useful to people who are implementing programs. I've been part of a dialogue forum on programs addressing violence against women and children. And in that space, they brought in people who are evaluators, researchers, people who are NGOs providing services, they have government officials. And what I always saw was that, so people who are focused on implementation are not thinking about these reflective questions, because they're just thinking about how do I make sure that the families that I'm servicing get the services that they need. They're just thinking about that child who needs counseling and that mom who needs help because she's not coping with her baby. That's what they're concerned about. And all these things about what is your theory of change, how would these actions that they're doing produce change? They're not always actively thinking about it. They just know this needs to be done. And by bringing in these kinds of questions into that discussion, how that has been really useful in a forum like that, because I think evaluations ask different questions. And that's not necessarily to challenge that people are doing the wrong thing, but it just asks different questions, and therefore helps people sometimes tell their own program story better, because then they can see the logic and they can think about it beyond just I'm providing this service. They can start thinking about why are we providing this service? What are we trying to impact in communities? And that's always useful, in any conversations, whether they're presenting it at a conference or presenting it to donors where they need additional funding, or to government that's funding their programs. In a context like ours, where the issue around the ability to produce knowledge, the ability to generate ideas, has been seen as something that certain groups are not capable of, and is often reinforced subtly, and sometimes in things that we don't think about, right? In who's teaching in schools, and who do people see talking as experts on health, on whatever, and that reinforces that notion that certain people don't know, and certain people's knowledge is not important. And that's why I think for me it's important that you have evaluators of different backgrounds, because also that shows also whether it's to students or whatever, that everybody has got knowledge, and they can have the skills to produce knowledge that's useful, whether it's in policy discussions or it's in conversations. And that's an issue that I think it's important, that and that representativity is not just about having the numbers of people represented, is that it actually is a meaningful thing in society, is that there is something about people seeing people who look like them doing certain things, because then they can be inspired that, well, that is possible for me too. It was important for women to see other women in senior positions, because young women could be inspired that could be their future. In Uganda not so long ago, and we met NGOs that are doing very creative research methods in communities that are cost effective, they work in their context, and I think it would be really great to get those methods and tools that they're using into mainstream, because right now they're not necessarily in mainstream, and I think this is where that interfaces with all this conversations that have been taking place around Made in Africa, because I think really that's what it means. Like, people are doing things, and often because evaluators come and we have theories about evaluation and how evaluation should look like, we can be dismissive of innovative methods that are being generated and being developed with communities. So I'm really hoping that we can do more of kind of collecting those and seeing what people are already doing. I know also that there's been a lot of talks around storytelling, as a method. And I listened to somebody at Samia conference, and he he was really just inspirational to listen to, because he was just talking about how they use storytelling as a way of both collecting data and helping in one of their programs that they were intervening with students, and how that was such a powerful tool, because they recognized that the communities that the community they were working with were actually oral. So they spoke a lot more than they wrote. And so they used that to then kind of, bring in their knowledge that they were not necessarily sharing in the form that initially they wanted them to share, which is, they were giving them papers to write their stories. And I think, yeah, so I think there's new things. Some of it is not so new, you're just coming to know it. That's some interesting in that space. And also, like, I think which is not quite evaluations, but the guys who've been doing social audits in South Africa, and that method, I think they've got a connection with they've got Indian counterparts, and that method itself has also been shown to be very useful with communities, because it really gets communities involved in understanding what government is providing to them, and giving them voice in assessing whether that is effective or not. Social audits, they use communities to assess what government has delivered, particularly with basic services. In this case, the one that I'm familiar with, they were doing it in with housing development and with sanitation provision. And so they use community members to assess what has been delivered by government in that community. And then they also look at what government itself says, and then they contrast that with what communities are actually saying. And then they create a platform to have a conversation with government and with communities. So it's a very interesting approach to, I don't know if you can call it evaluation, but it's a very interesting approach nonetheless, which really, really gives voice to communities, but also is still systematic, is methodical in its approach.